The ballroom lights flickered once, a subtle tremor, like a heartbeat catching. In the middle of the grand hall stood Ilara, her fingers curled around the handle of a polished violin case, eyes glistening with unshed tears. Across from her, Damien, draped in tailored silk and carrying the kind of name-drop legacy that echoes in boardrooms, smirked and spoke softly. "Play the violin, and I'll marry you." The room erupted in polite laughter. Guests raised crystal glasses. Ilara refused to laugh. No one realized then this was not a game. No one understood what that old violin meant. But when she placed the bow on the strings, what came next silenced the laughter and shattered Damien's world forever. Before we go deeper, tell us, what would you do in her place? Comment below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and twist the soul. Because the truth behind this moment goes far deeper than anyone in that ballroom could imagine. It began 6 months earlier in the basement studio of a modest apartment building in Chicago, where Ilara lived with her aging golden retriever, Jasper, and a lifetime of half-spoken dreams. She taught violin lessons by day, repairing her own strings with gum and hope, her hands smelling faintly of rosin and old wood. Damien watched her from afar, at charity galas, at high-end art openings, always noticing the way she held her instrument, the slight tremor in her left hand when she thought no one was watching. He approached one crisp autumn evening, offering a job, perform at his private event, front and center, and perhaps something more. Ilara hesitated. She had vowed to protect the violin that once belonged to her late mother, whose voice had gone silent 2 years earlier after a car accident. The violin had been passed down, whispering memories of lullabies and failure, nightmares and promise. Damien's world was built on headlines and high towers, the boardrooms, the yachts, the people who moved like chess pieces and shone like polished marble. His offer seemed too glossy, too final to be real. Yet Ilara accepted, with one condition. The violin must remain hers entirely, no strings attached. Damien smiled, agreed, and for a moment the air filled with possibility. As the night of the event drew near, Ilara practiced in the living room. She felt the weight of that case like a promise and a burden. One evening, hours before the debut, she caught a whiff of something. The electric charge of rain against pavement, the distant hum of tires, the sharp taste of fear when she remembered her mother's last words. "Don't let them take your song." She paused. Jasper thumped his tail. She closed her eyes and drew a steady breath. That night, in the grand ballroom with towering windows and a chandelier so ornate you could trace every crystal drop if you tried, Ilara stood in place. Damien approached behind the velvet rope, backed by applause. He offered a glass of champagne, but Ilara whispered, "No, thank you." The violin case sat at her feet. He repeated his earlier words, "Play the violin, and I'll marry you." The laughter started. She looked across, saw the smirk morph into expectation. Then she opened the case. She drew the bow. The first note trembled in the stiff air. The room shifted. The second note carried a memory, her mother's favorite lullaby, the one that had comforted her after nightmares, the one recorded in a scratchy cassette tape long lost. The guests glanced at each other. Damien's smirk faltered. The music rose, not grandiose, but honest, human, soft, intimate. Somewhere in that rich crowd, the sound of a chair scraping stopped. The chandeliers seemed to lean in. Ilara's eyes flicked to Damien and held him there. And then, the twist. As the final chord faded, she tossed the violin case aside. It landed with a soft thunk that sounded like a verdict. She stood silent. Damien opened his mouth, but no words came. The guests murmured. She turned and walked out of the room, leaving him standing under glittering lights, his empire of approval cracking. Outside, rain had begun, each drop tapping the pavement like tiny demands. Ilara paused by her car, looked back at the building, and whispered through the drizzle, "I'll play my music, but only for me." 6 months later, she launched her own music school in her old neighborhood. Damien's name faded from tabloids. For the first time in years, he walked through an empty mansion, hearing echoes instead of applause. Ilara's violin now carries students' laughter, mistakes, and triumphs. Every morning she opens windows wide so the strings can breathe free in the dawn air. She sometimes thinks of that ballroom moment, how she felt small and brave at once. What would you have done in her place? Would you trade a lifetime of obedience for a single song of your own? How much of yourself are you willing to reclaim when the world tells you you're just an instrument? Ilara Winters was 23, but her eyes carried the quiet weight of someone twice her age. Once called a music prodigy, she had played in Vienna's grand halls before she even turned 10, her name whispered alongside legends. But after the night, her father, an acclaimed violinist, collapsed mid-performance, never to rise again. Ilara's world turned mute. The violin she once loved became a ghost she couldn't bear to touch. Every time she heard its strings, she felt her chest tighten, her hands go cold, as if her body remembered grief more than sound. She worked double shifts now, balancing trays at upscale events across the city, trying to survive in a place built on the very music she'd come to fear. Vienna, where every street hummed with symphonies, every square echoed with violins. Yet for Ilara, it was all silence. Each morning she walked past the Musikverein, hearing faint rehearsals from behind gilded doors, pretending not to listen. That evening, the cold air carried the smell of champagne and fresh lilies as she arrived at the Imperial Palais Hotel, where Damien Laurent's charity gala was already in motion. Damien, 30 years old, heir to a financial empire that stretched from Zurich to Manhattan, was known for his charm, his precision, and the emotional vacancy that followed him like a shadow. Beneath his calm demeanor, he hid a grief he never spoke of, his mother's suicide when he was 17. Since that day, he'd grown allergic to sentiment, dismissing emotion as weakness. His voice had become his weapon, his smile his armor. Tonight's event was supposed to be a celebration of logic, ambition, and the power of the mind, a mocking tribute, as some whispered, to the foolishness of feeling. The theme, art without emotion. Ilara's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her black uniform apron. The ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers and laughter that echoed just a little too perfectly. Wealth had a sound, and she knew it well, the clinking of silverware, the shallow praise, the hollow applause. She tried to focus on the rhythm of service, plates, glasses, napkins. Her gaze avoided the stage, the grand piano, and the faint strains of an orchestra rehearsing in the distance. But then she saw it. Behind glass, near the entrance to the ballroom, under a small plaque that read, "In memory of great masters," sat a violin. Its varnish had faded in the same places her father's once had. The delicate swirl on the scroll, the tiny chip near the bridge. It couldn't be. Her heart stuttered. Her breath caught mid-step. She leaned closer, tracing the shape with her eyes as if afraid it might vanish. It was identical to her father's lost instrument, the one that disappeared after his final concert. A server brushed past her shoulder, muttering, "Beautiful, isn't it? Damien had it imported, supposedly from a private collection." Ilara didn't answer. Her pulse quickened. How could Damien have it? Her family had searched for years, desperate to find what was taken from them the night her father died. And now, here it was, displayed like a decoration at a party, built to mock the very art her father had devoted his life to. Across the room, Damien noticed her. Their eyes met for the first time. For a moment, the noise of the gala faded, replaced by something unspoken. She didn't know him, not yet. But something in his gaze, curiosity, recognition, maybe even guilt, held her there longer than it should have. But why was her father's violin there, and how did Damien get it? Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, Click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The laughter in the ballroom had the texture of glass, smooth on the surface but sharp enough to cut beneath. Ilara moved quietly between the tables, balancing an empty tray as the orchestra's final piece faded into the low hum of conversation. She tried not to look at the display case, but her eyes betrayed her. The violin gleamed under the chandelier's soft gold light, catching every flicker as if alive. She couldn't stop staring, couldn't shake the feeling that her father's spirit lingered inside that polished wood, waiting to be heard one last time. Then she heard his voice. Damien Laurent's, low, confident, carrying effortlessly through the hall. He stood surrounded by investors and socialites, a drink in hand, his smirk perfectly rehearsed. "Music," he said, swirling the wine in his glass, "is manipulation. It's just emotion packaged for profit. I can make anyone dance for money, even a girl who's lost everything." The group around him chuckled. He didn't notice that Ilara, just a few steps away, had frozen mid-motion, her breath catching like a cord pulled too tight. Those words cut deeper than he could have known. The laughter rolled on, cruel in its ease. A guest, a woman in a glittering silver gown, turned toward Ilara, eyes glassy with champagne. "You there," she said, gesturing with her glass. "You used to play, didn't you? Go on then, prove him wrong. Play us something." A few others joined in, their amusement rising like a cruel tide. Ilara's tray trembled in her hands. I don't play anymore," she murmured, her voice barely above the music. "Oh, come now," another guest chimed in. "We're among friends. A prodigy like you should never hide her gift." Damien looked at her then, really looked. The corner of his mouth curved upward into a knowing smirk. "If she dares play that violin," he said, his tone laced with arrogance, "I'll marry her, right here, tonight." The room erupted with laughter. Champagne spilled. Someone clapped as if the idea were entertainment. Ilara's chest burned with shame, the weight of every gaze pressing on her like a verdict. Her throat tightened, and she turned toward the glass case once more. The violin seemed to call her name. The air around it shimmered with memory. Her father's gentle hands, the sound of late-night rehearsals, the scent of pine resin and candle smoke. Against her better judgment, she stepped closer. Each footstep echoed louder than the last, until the entire hall grew silent. She reached for the case latch. A hush fell across the room, thick and uncertain. As she opened it, her fingers trembled violently. The violin rested on the velvet lining, perfect yet familiar, like an old scar she thought had faded. Her reflection shimmered on its surface, her eyes red-rimmed with fear and something else, resolve. She picked it up slowly, her fingers brushing over the carved initials near the bridge. Her father's. The murmurs behind her softened into whispers, and then, in that moment, her mind drifted, back to a sunlit afternoon years ago. She was 8, sitting on a wooden stool beside her father, his laughter filling the air as he tuned the strings. "Music isn't sound," he had said, pressing her small fingers onto the strings. "It's truth. Every note you play tells the world who you are." The memory wrapped around her like warmth and ache combined. She could almost hear him now, just behind her shoulder, whispering the same words again. Her grip tightened. She raised the bow. Damien leaned back in his chair, amused, confident this would end in awkward silence. But Ilara didn't move for several long seconds. The tension built so thickly that even the chandeliers seemed to hum. The crowd leaned forward, waiting, mocking, expecting her to falter. But as the bow touched the strings, something inside her broke open. The first note barely made a sound. It trembled, small and fragile, like a voice forgotten. Ilara's bow wavered, her fingers stiff, the world pressing in from every side. But then something shifted. The weight of the room seemed to fall away. The chandelier's glow blurred into a golden haze, the chatter died, and the only thing left was that single trembling string. The melody began uncertain, each note reaching for the next, like a heartbeat learning how to live again. Her breath steadied. The second phrase came stronger, the third, louder, the fourth, alive. The sound filled the ballroom with something no one could name. Guests who moments ago laughed now stood motionless, champagne glasses frozen mid-air. The waitstaff had stopped moving. Even the orchestra musicians seemed to hold their breath. The melody carried sorrow, beauty, and the kind of truth that made the skin prickle. Every note told a story, one the audience hadn't come to hear but couldn't look away from. Ilara's eyes glistened as her arm moved faster, bow-meeting strings with the precision of muscle memory and the passion of a wound reopening. Somewhere deep in the music, images flashed through her mind. Her father, smiling as he lifted her tiny hands to guide the bow, his voice echoing, "Music isn't sound, it's truth." Then the crash of that final concert, his body collapsing mid-note, the sound of the crowd gasping, her mother's cries, the silence afterward that swallowed everything. Years of scraping by, teaching lessons she couldn't bear to listen to, ignoring the violin-shaped shadow hanging over every dream. She saw herself watching from the back of a music store window, unable to walk inside. All of it poured into the bow, the strings, the air. Her tone turned fierce, aching, defiant, untamed. It wasn't just performance anymore, it was confession. Each chord bled emotion so raw that even the chandeliers seemed to shimmer differently. People began to lower their eyes, ashamed without knowing why. One woman pressed a napkin to her cheek. A man, once smirking, now swallowed hard, his throat tight. Damien's smirk had vanished completely. His posture, once casual and superior, shifted as he leaned forward, captivated. His eyes softened, flickering with something he didn't expect to feel. Recognition. The final section came like a storm, a cry for everything lost and found again in the same breath. And then, the last note, pure, trembling, infinite. It hung in the air, suspended longer than seemed possible, before fading into a silence so deep it felt sacred. No one clapped, no one dared. The stillness was absolute, as if the world itself needed a moment to recover. Ilara slowly lowered the bow. Her chest rose and fell. Her hands shook. She didn't look at anyone. For a few seconds she simply breathed, eyes fixed on the violin in her hands. Then Damien stood. His voice, when it came, was quieter than anyone had ever heard it. "Who are you?" he asked, disbelief and something close to reverence in his tone. Ilara met his gaze, her own eyes steady now, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the silence. "The daughter," she said, "of the man whose soul you bought." A murmur rippled through the crowd, confusion, guilt, realization. Damien blinked, his mind racing. The violin, her words, it couldn't be. But deep down, something told him she was right, because that violin, the one she played, wasn't just her father's. It was stolen. "Before we go deeper, tell us, what would you have done if that were your father's instrument? Would you have played or walked away? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the stories that stay with you long after they end. The silence in the ballroom lasted only a heartbeat before the world rushed back in, a flurry of whispers, gasps, and uneasy glances. Ilara set the violin down, her chest still heaving, and walked out before anyone could stop her. Damien stood frozen, the echo of her music still humming somewhere deep in his mind. He didn't move until the crowd parted for him. Then, without saying a word, he followed her through the marble corridor, past portraits of forgotten nobility, into the dim hallway behind the stage. He found her there, near the exit, clutching the violin case like a shield. "Ilara," he began, his voice breaking through the tension. She turned slowly, eyes blazing. "That violin," she said quietly, "was my father's. Where did you get it?" Her tone wasn't angry. It was worse, It was steady, cold. Damien hesitated, the polished confidence gone. "It was part of a private auction," he said, words tumbling out too quickly. "My company handled a liquidation years ago. It was just an asset transfer from a debt estate. I didn't know." She cut him off. "A debt auction," she repeated, her jaw trembling. "You bought my father's life like a business transaction." Her voice rose, echoing against the stone walls. "Do you have any idea what that violin meant to him? To me?" Damien tried to step closer, but she moved back. "I didn't know it was yours," he said, his tone almost pleading now. "I swear to you, I didn't." His words hung in the air, fragile and hollow. Ilara looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she whispered, "You didn't have to know. You just had to care." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in the half-light. The heavy door closed behind her, the sound final. For the first time in his life, Damien had nothing to say, no clever remark, no shield of arrogance. Only the faint, unrelenting echo of her music looping in his head, haunting him. That night, long after the gala had ended and the guests had gone, Damien sat alone in the ballroom. The violin remained on the table beside him. He stared at it, running his fingers along the grain of the wood. He could still feel her presence in the room, the sound of that melody lingering like a ghost. Every note replayed in his mind, sharper now, heavier. He poured himself another drink, but even the taste of aged whiskey couldn't drown it out. The melody followed him home, into his penthouse, into his sleep. Over the next few days, he tried to reach her. He called the event coordinator. No record of her employment. He checked the staffing agency. No one named Ilara Winters on file. It was as if she had vanished completely, leaving only the echo of that song behind. And yet, everywhere he went, he heard it. The faint hum in the elevator, the sound of wind through glass, the whisper of tires on wet pavement. The music followed him like a memory that refused to die. Each time he heard it, something inside him tightened. For the first time in years, Damien Loran felt guilt, not the kind that could be hidden behind charm or buried under wealth, but the kind that demanded to be heard. He would find her again. He didn't know why. Apology, obsession, redemption, it all blurred into one relentless need to understand. But what he didn't know was that Ilara's return would cost him everything. Before we continue, tell us, do you believe people can change when guilt finally catches up to them? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the stories that stir your heart and make you think long after they end.